NFL Week 2 game breakdowns. In this video, I'll be discussing all the Sunday games, and rather than do a video for each individual game like I've done in the past, I'm just going to run through the games in one video, and I'll have them broken down by chapters, which will help you guys skip to the games you want. Week 2, already off to a bad start. Bills-Dolphins game just ended. I was on the Dolphins, and they never had a chance. I knew I was in trouble about 30 minutes before the game. Just about everyone whose opinion I respect when it comes to the NFL were on Buffalo. And I'm not talking about people on social media or like pick services. I'm talking about professional bettors I know and sharp betting groups, all of which are way smarter than me and way sharper than I'll ever be. All of them who hardly ever agree on the same team. They all either had no play on the game or were on Buffalo. But it's one game. Got to move on. Short memory. Let's get into NFL Week 2. Now, Week 2 is commonly referred to as the overreaction week, and a lot of sharp bettors know this, and they'll manipulate the betting market by piggybacking onto some of these public recency biases, and we'll get the line moving one way just to come back later in the week when the limits at the sports books are at their max and then hammer their true position. So need to be careful chasing steam or using early week line movement to identify sharp action. I'll do my best in these game previews to share my opinion on the market, but also keep in mind I'm recording this video late on Thursday night, and by the time I upload these videos and you watch them, a lot could change. All right, first game up, 1 p.m., Raiders, Ravens. First thing we notice is here, or first thing I notice, I should say, is the total and the adjustment towards the under. It opened at most books 43, has been bet down to around 41.5 or 41, depending on the book. Some books actually had this at 44 on the look-ahead line, so it's a pretty big move from here. But it does make sense. Both offenses struggled a bit week 1, and when you consider how conservative the Raiders looked and just how unorganized their offense looked with the turnovers, and now you have a Raiders team with Gardner Minshew going on the road, traveling cross-country west to east for an early start time against the Ravens, who have extra time to prepare because, remember, they played on Thursday, so not a good spot for the Raiders. A lot of the sharper sports books have adjusted this Ravens spread up to the teaser blocker territory, moving from 8.5 up to 9 or 9.5, which helps avoid all the teaser liability at 8.5. I do have the Ravens on a teaser. I took them down from 8.5 to 2.5, just below that field goal. It does fit the Wong teaser strategy. Probably my favorite teaser leg of the week, too. Baltimore was one of the few week 1 teams that lost, but think is better than what they showed or how they performed. I think the Ravens just played sloppy offensively and need to figure out their offensive line. Defensively, we knew they'd look different with the departure of defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald, and they did. Despite all this, they were very close to beating who I have as the best team in the league. Now they get extra time to prepare, more time for Mark Andrews to get back and healthy, and another week to kind of figure out the offensive line. The Ravens used a ton of heavy personnel formations in week 1 versus KC. For those of you that don't know, heavy personnel is multiple tight end sets or running backs. It's more of like a run formation with more blockers. 55% of the Ravens' plays were ran out of heavy personnel. When you look at what the Chargers did to the Raiders week 1, they lined up in heavy personnel and just pounded the ball down the Raiders' throats and just wore their defense down. The difference between the Chargers and the Ravens is the Ravens aren't forced into this one-dimensional style and can operate out of different formations, assuming the Ravens have the same game plan. I would think they have similar success as the Chargers did. The Raiders just seem like an easy team to solve anyway. Just take away Devontae Adams, and you've solved a big part of what the Raiders can do to hurt you. And the Raiders are just such a poorly coached team. I was on them last week in week 1. Antonio Pierce had to have had the worst coaching grade of any coach week 1. And I kind of like, that the Harbaugh brothers are exchanging notes and information. Of course, we know Jim Harbaugh is the head coach of the Chargers, who just beat the Raiders last week, and is the brother of John Harbaugh, coach of the Ravens. Speaking of Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, transition into the Chargers-Panthers. To me, this is a perfect example of a week 2 overreaction. This look ahead line was Chargers -3 at most sports books, and then after both teams played on Sunday, the line reopened -6, which is a huge adjustment. But with how bad Carolina looked and how the Chargers looked, the sports books did have to adjust. But when you see a field goal or more line move like this, it's usually due to some injury. And when there's no injury, there's usually a big contrast between each team and how they performed. And this is what we have here. And Sharps actually bet Carolina in week 1. They opened around +5 and got bet down to +3.5 by kickoff. So it's very unlikely those same Sharps are looking at the results from week 1 and thinking Carolina is as bad as everyone else thinks. One game means nothing. It's just too small of a sample size to identify a team's true ability. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Carolina money come in later in the week, especially if this line gets to 7. It won't last long. Sharps will be all over +7 and pound that off the number. Now, of course, it might be a different story if the Panthers turn up with a really bad final injury report, because they have a bunch of guys that were limited in practice. Jadeveon Clowney with an ankle, Johnny Hecker back, Robert Hunt shoulder, that guy Jewel, Damian Lewis, Tommy Tremble. These guys are all like limited or out of practice. But if most of those guys play, laying almost a touchdown on the Chargers, who are going on the road with such a low total of 39, doesn't seem like the right play. The Chargers aren't some explosive team that's going to put up points quickly, which is what you want when needing to win by margin. Let's keep it moving. Next game, we'll go Saints, Cowboys. Both teams coming off wins where they just dismantled their opponent. So the natural question we want to ask ourselves, are the Saints and Cowboys that good, or how much of their week 1 performance had to do with their opponent? Both teams overperformed in week 1, but I think everyone would agree that the Saints, out of any team in week 1, benefited the most from their opponent. This was really just a perfect matchup for the Saints. I talked about this in my week 1 recap video, but the difference in Derek Carr's overall QB numbers when he has a clean pocket and when he's under pressure is just night and day. It's the biggest gap of any QB the last 2 seasons, of how good he is when not pressured and how bad he is when pressured. Luckily for him and the Saints, Carolina just can't get pressure. Carolina couldn't even get pressure against a Saints O-line that has some question marks. The Panthers only had 2 QB pressures last week. The Cowboys, they had the most QB pressures of any defense in week 1. Dallas looks like they will be involved in all types of moneyline parlays and teasers. Everyone's going to be betting them just to win at home. As simple as that. And Dallas is getting pounded with bets and money, but this line hasn't budged. This should always raise a red flag. I use this example all the time, but if you're a sportsbook manager and everyone's betting the same team, what would you do? Well, I know what I'd do. I'd be adjusting the line to make the team getting all the betting action look less appealing to bet. That's not what we have here, though. Now, the total, the over got some money as well, which is no surprise. Both offenses were on display in week 1, but same question about the spread. How much of that matchup based on opponent? Saints had the best defensive performance of any team week 1 according to EPA. Dallas wasn't far behind at number 5. Of course, both teams played offenses that are pretty bad, but even when you adjust for opponent strength using the DVOA metric, they're both near the top. This could be another plus matchup for Dallas. Dak and the Dallas offense is really good when facing cover 1. Dak might be the most efficient quarterback when facing cover 1 or man coverage. There's a ton of examples of him having big games versus teams that run this style of defensive formations, including last week versus the Browns and Jim Schwartz. While the Saints and Dennis Allen play a very similar style of defense as the Browns, and so the obvious thing would be to switch out of cover 1 and don't play any man, because it's no secret how good Dak is and CeeDee Lamb at beating these defensive looks, but it's just not that simple as a defense. If an offense forces you out of your base look or your comfort zone, you've typically already lost. You never want to be forced to adjust or let the opponent dictate what you do. Ideally, you want them to adjust based on what you do. This is a tough game. The number seems right to me. I know Dallas has been great at home, but don't like them needing to win by a touchdown. Saints, Marshawn Lattimore, their best cover corner, is also questionable, but probably a pass here. Next game up, we got Tampa Bay, Detroit. I had a best bet on the over in last week's Bucks Commanders game. I bet over 43.5. They combined for 57 points. Now in this game, with the total of 51.5, it seems a bit high for a game involving the Lions, who want to run the ball behind that elite offensive line. And is Baker Mayfield going to have another career day on the road in Detroit? I think that's unlikely, but I do think Tampa Bay might be a team that's undervalued. They came into this season being a little disrespected in the futures market. Odds makers had the Bucks at plus 310, I believe. Yeah, plus 310, something under, that's pretty big underdogs in the NFC South division, which isn't super competitive, a division the Bucks have owned the last 5 years. Their season win total was set around 8 wins, so expectation for this season is that of a league average team. And not saying this is the week to bet them and take advantage of them being undervalued, because they do have some secondary injuries. They had 3 defensive backs leave the game last week, so their status will be important. And I keep seeing people try to take away from what Baker did last week in his performance, saying it was against a historically bad secondary, which I do agree. But regardless of who the opponent is, what he did was impressive. It was a career day for him. And I can't imagine, how much it must suck having to read all that shit after such a big game. But anyway, moving on, we got Colts, Packers. The look-ahead numbers on this game had Green Bay minus 4.5 with a total of 47. Remember, look-ahead lines are different than opening lines, but with look-ahead lines of Green Bay minus 4.5 with a total of 47, and we're now seeing Colts minus 2.5 with a total of 40.5. It's a massive adjustment. Is Jordan Love to Malik Willis worth almost a touchdown? The line tried to go to 3.5, but Green Bay money did come in and moved it back. So when we see that happen, we have a pretty good idea of where the line will close or what the market will have resistance on at what number. We've seen Malik Willis and know his game, but he's also only been with Green Bay for less than 3 weeks. He was a late add to the roster at the end of training camp. Now he's the starter. Career numbers are just awful. 52% completion percentage, 0 TDs thrown, 67 pass attempts, and he's been sacked 15 times. But we do see this all the time. The injured player theory. Starter gets hurt, backup comes in, line moves, which provides value on the team with the player out, and then you have the teammates with the star player out playing inspired or more motivated. I think the fact Green Bay didn't try to pick up a quarterback like Ryan Tannehill says they think Jordan Love's injury is short-term, and they'll probably just have to try and weather the storm for a game or two. He's actually listed as questionable right now, even though he hasn't practiced all week. But I said this in my Week 1 recap video, but man, I really do love this Indy offense and its huge big play capability. Indy didn't really get much going on the ground last week. Jonathan Taylor's longest carry was, I believe, 6 or 7 yards. But the Texans' run defense is sturdy. I think the Colts will find it easier to get the ground game working versus Green Bay run defense. So I do lean the Colts here. I like the idea of betting against teams coming off those international games. Green Bay's coming off that Brazil game. But they do get that extra day off to prepare and figure out the Willis stuff. Colts cornerback Juju Brents is hurt, and it's a secondary that I already think stinks, so that is a concern there. But next game up, going down the list here, we'll go Browns, Jags. I like the Jags here, -3. Browns offense is just a mess. Dealing with a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive system, new offensive line coach, and both offensive tackles already dealing with injuries. They have guys up front playing out of their normal position. And, of course, Deshaun Watson, Is this guy just completely washed now or what? All types of new distractions too with him. The lawsuit, he's dealing with personal issues, death in the family. Um, and this is a bad matchup for the Browns versus Jags defensive line that I think is underrated. It's Jags and nothing here for me. Next game up, let's look at Niners Vikings. Both teams looked good week one. The betting public will be teasing San Fran down just to win, and I want nothing to do with that. 49ers looked great in week one, no doubt, but it was their season opener, or their home opener, I should say, coming off the Super Bowl loss. It was a perfect spot for them to look good. They had the injured player theory working in their favor with McCaffrey ruled out just before kickoff to rally around that. And what usually happens the following week is a letdown spot. I think the Super Bowl hangover kicks in this week. It's a tough situational spot for the Niners, too, who just played on Monday night, now go on the road on a short week, less time to prepare, and they also have the Rams on deck, a divisional rival, so it's a potential letdown plus look ahead spot here, which I always try to avoid. When everyone's talking about how impressive the win is for the Niners without McCaffrey, it was impressive. They played good, but now there's talks about the Niners placing him on IR, which in my opinion I don't really think matters that much. A team like the Niners losing him just means more touches for Debo and Ayuk and Kittle, who are all studs. If McCaffrey played for a team like the Patriots or something, being out is much more impactful. And the market kind of agreed with this idea too, because the line barely moved with him being ruled out an hour before kickoff last week. And plus, that guy Mason isn't a real backup in the sense of other backups. He's a backup behind the best running back in the league, behind an elite O-line. So the Niners will be fine if they have to go without him for a few games. I'm definitely not downgrading the Niners on my power ratings or anything. For the Vikings, I mean, we can pretty much guarantee Sam Darnold will look a lot different this week going against the Niners and defensive coordinator Nick Sorson, who, if you remember, Sam Darnold was on the Niners last year, so this defense has a lot of familiarity with Darnold, seeing him in practice every day. Pretty big advantage here for the Niners. Defensively, the Vikings defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, routinely has one of the highest blitz rates in the league. Last year, when these two teams played, Purdy picked apart the Vikings when facing the blitz. Now, the Vikings did win that game 22-17, but I'm curious if Flores switches up his normal heavy blitz schemes, because it didn't really affect Purdy at all last meeting. But lean Vikings here, I guess, if I had to pick. Next game up, we got Seattle, New England. I'm on the hometown Patriots in this game. This was just a numbers grab for me. When you have a team that's teetering between +3.5 and +3, I almost always just grab the +3.5, because even if it closes +4 or +4.5, it's not like +3.5 is a huge difference from +4 or even +5, but it is a big difference from +3 to +2.5. And I like betting on West Coast teams. I should say I like betting against West Coast teams on the road traveling east for an early start time. It's been a negative spot for as long as I can remember. Seahawks are banged up too. Kenneth Walker Jr. or the third has ab injury, I think, or stomach injury. But more importantly, major concerns on the O-line. They lost George Fant early in the game last week, but are already without starters and have guys playing out of position. Seahawks really struggled to move the ball in the first half last week, and it was really all related to their O-line once Fant left the game. They were just down so many guys. Now, I'm obviously concerned with how the Patriots find ways to score in this game. Seahawks #1 rated DVOA performance in week one, which shouldn't be a surprise. Mike McDonald, reigning defensive coach of the year, and that defense is already clicking in Seattle, just like he had it in Baltimore last year. Now, of course, Seattle benefited from getting Denver with a rookie quarterback making his first start on the road in a hostile environment, but no question the Seattle defensive front is just nasty. And when you think about how the Patriots won in week one, it was by pounding the rock with Ross Stevenson. Not sure they will be able to play bully ball versus this Seahawks defense. Also, head coach Mike McDonald has some familiarity with seeing Brissett, facing him twice a year when they were both in the AFC North Division. I'll be watching this one live for sure, which I normally don't watch games live, but I'm excited to see the matchup between Patriots #1 corner Christian Gonzalez versus DK Metcalf. That's going to be a good one and a good test to see where this kid Gonzalez is at. Next up, moving right along, Jets Titans. Don't have much an opinion on this game. I guess a big question was answered last week for the Jets. Everyone wanted to know, what does Rodgers have left? What will he look like? I think we got a good answer last week for San Fran. He can definitely still throw it good. He's not a complete statue out there in the backfield. But what's funny is the aspect of the Jets nobody had questions about was their defense, especially their defensive front. And they got absolutely bullied versus San Fran like we've never seen before. Now, the market seems to think they'll bounce back this week with a performance, this defense, because the total has steadily dropped all week and is currently down 3 points from where it opened at 44. I do lean Tennessee here as home dogs. Market seems to like that side as well. It got steamed down from the opener, despite the Jets receiving, pretty much most of the money here. It does show Jets getting 90% of the money on the spread, but I don't really trust these reports on this site in particular, but it does look like we have a reverse line movement situation setting up here, which is usually a sharp money indicator. Whenever you have a team getting lopsided money, but the line is moving away from them like it is on the Jets, it would signal a reverse line move, but it's something I've gotten away from recently because you just can't really trust all these betting percentage reports. All right, going on 20 minutes here. We got one more 1 p.m. Sunday game. NFC East divisional game between the G-Men and Commanders. I like the over in this one and bet it over 42.5 earlier today. Now, normally I don't like betting overs in divisional games. There's just so much familiarity between the teams, and they typically have good game plans to take away each other's best stuff, but I have to look to bet against this Washington defense any way possible. The Bucs receivers last week were just streaking downfield, wide open, all game versus this Washington defense. This Commanders defense really might end up being historically bad by year's end. Now, the average closing total for all Commanders games last year was 44. The secondary was bad last year too, but the offense was also worse last year. Now, this year we have this Washington team with a better offense and a defense that's either just as bad or probably worse than last year. And we're seeing totals at 42.5, 43. This total just seems way too low for a game with this Washington team, but it does take two to tango when betting totals. Washington can't get over this total alone, so I'll need some help from the G-Men. Not much good I can take away from the G-Men last week, and the only good thing this week is the G-Men will be facing this Washington defense, but I'm just hoping the Giants' offense isn't as bad as they looked last week versus Minnesota, and I think maybe that Brian Flores heavy blitz defense was just too much for them, and they do bounce back this week. It's tough relying on Daniel Jones for points, but there was a respected sharp group that bet the Giants Tuesday morning. They bet Giants plus 2.5 on Tuesday morning, brought this number down to 1. So I think that's a good sign. I guess that someone thinks the Giants will score, and looks like the market agrees with the over as it's up to 43.5. And this has been a real under series. 5 of the last 6 games all went under, but both defenses looked pretty bad last week, and it's a what have we seen lately league. So let's go points in this one. If the Giants and Daniel Jones lay another stinker of a game versus this Washington defense, they might be the worst offense in the league. You know what I'm going to do here? I just decided. We're going on like 20-something minutes. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to do a separate video for the 4 p.m. games and the primetime games. I'll do Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football in one video, and then the 4 p.m.s in one video. So if you're still watching this, be on the lookout for 2 more video uploads. The 4 p.m. game breakdowns, and then the primetime games. If you watched to the end and found any of this stuff helpful, interesting, or informative, and will consider giving this video a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. My phone is ringing. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, good luck with your bets.